Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about interview anxiety. A lot of people have been saying to me that they're feeling out of practice for interviews because of lockdown. People are saying that their confidence has been knocked by seeing less people, and talking with masks on hasn't helped us to practice our communication skills. So many of us, when faced with an interview or an online test for a job, which is becoming more common, we really find it difficult not to be overcome with nervousness and fear. But it's okay because most of us feel like that. But there are a lot of things that we can do to help ourselves. So when we go through an interview, we're usually bombarded with loads of questions, such as these in the slide that Becca is now going to put up for us. And this slide shows us the sort of things that they tend to ask you. And we start overthinking these potential questions before the interview. So, where do you hope to be in 5 years? What are your strengths? Tell us about yourself. And there's so much thinking that we have about all these potential questions. It can start to become really overwhelming and it makes us feel under pressure. There are people who thrive on all these kinds of questions, but those people are in the minority. However, the fact that some people do actually enjoy interviews should make us stop and think just for a minute. So, is it the interview that is making me anxious, or is it my anxious thinking about the interview? So, the idea behind CBT is that the way we think affects how we feel about things. So, if we examine somebody who's really feeling anxious about an interview, you can see what I mean. So, we can look at how it's our thinking that affects how we feel and not the actual interview. Now, Becca's just going to put another slide up for us. And this slide shows a lady, her name's Patricia, and she has got an interview coming up. And Patricia is caught in a vicious cycle. So she's having a load of thoughts, which are generating feelings, which are causing physical reactions, and they're making her feel and behave in a certain way. So her behaviour, for example, is procrastination and avoidance because she wants to put off the interview. She doesn't want to think about it. She's trying to say, "I'll look at it tomorrow." She won't prepare. And she's made herself feel quite ill because of the thoughts she's having about her forthcoming interview. And in her state of panic, she is thinking, "I can't do this. I'm going to be awful. What if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about? And I don't want all that focus on me." So the amount of thinking that's going on before she's even in the situation is huge. And the physical reactions she's having are also problematic. But if we look carefully at what thoughts Patricia is actually having, we can see that she's got into a negative self-talk pattern. And her thoughts are absolute and extreme, and they're not rational. They're not based on the evidence because we don't know what's going to happen in the interview. She's just living in the imagination of what might happen. So if I remind you that CBT is not about positive thinking, it's about rational, balanced thinking, okay? Trying to kid yourself into believing everything will be okay. I'm going to be positive, be happy, be positive. That doesn't work. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about looking at the amount of overthinking we're doing and approaching it from a rational, balanced perspective. So if you go back to Patricia as an example, she's viewing this interview as an extreme hazard to her, something to be feared. So her body is going off into fight or flight completely all the time. She can feel her heart racing, her thinking's really foggy, and she's starting to feel hot and stressed. But if you can recognise, all of you, I'm sure you can, the actual danger that Patricia is in is psychological. It's a psychological situation, not a physical situation. Her symptoms are being caused by anxious thinking about the interview. These physical feelings she's experienced will pass as soon as the interview is over. These feelings are temporary, like all feelings. Our feelings come and go with the kind of thinking that's showing up for us in that moment. So the thinking that's showing up for her is really worried and anxious thinking, and her body is responding to that. So what can we do to develop more rational and balanced thoughts? So we can try to dispute the irrational thoughts that we're having by developing a more balanced and alternative way of thinking. Now I've drawn something out here for you to look at. It's a bit huge. And it's upside down. That's not ideal. So if I turn it round, Okay, and it's a 4-column thought record. It doesn't matter if you can't see it all completely, because I'll just explain it anyway. So the situation is the interview. The feelings are fear, anxiety, we're hot, with terror for some people, headaches, overthinking, and brain fog's a huge one for people when they're having an interview. So the negative automatic thought might be, I can't do this, or I'm going to make a mess of it. Those are two really common feelings people have in relation to interviews. So what I suggest is we do something called, it's more correct to say. So instead of having a negative automatic thought, we have something, so we say it's more correct to say. Can you see that? Let's just turn that up again. So I can in fact do this. I just don't feel like I want to. I'm afraid to do it, and I don't think I'll do well. There is no evidence for this until I try it. It would be more correct to say I'm worried that I won't impress because I'm nervous. So if you get the idea that if of a thought record like that, it's a really good idea to draw these out for yourself. There are other things you can use. You can use one of the thought records that we have at Mind. And like I've said previously, if you write to me or you email me at the end on the Facebook page, we can send you one of these out. And it's got inside, it's got the columns, and you can fill one out. So you could start examining the negative automatic thoughts that you're having. Or like I do, I keep a small thinking book like this, if you can see that. And it's just a cheap book, and you sort of write down and you look at the thoughts in there, and so it just keeps reminding you. But when these thoughts are occurring in the future, what I really recommend you do is you do something called a thought stop. So you deliberately choose to think some new thoughts instead, okay? So to get good and really practice the thought stopping, we need to do it over and over again. But it does work. And if you keep doing it, it could become the new way that you think. So the next time you see yourself having a negative automatic thought about something, in this case we're talking about interviews, then say to yourself, it's more correct to say. So it's more correct to say, in other words, this is a more balanced alternative way of looking at this. Instead of just going with those negative automatic thoughts, start churning up more and more overthinking. So you do a thought pause and you say, it's more correct to say, like I showed you there, it's more correct to say, I can in fact do this, I'm just afraid at the moment. So that's a more balanced view. There are other things you can do as well to dispute any sort of overthinking and worry thinking. Becca's just going to put another slide up for us. And it says tips for disputing irrational negative thoughts. So what is the evidence? What alternative views are there? And what is the effect of thinking the way I do? For example, the effect is brain fog, my heart's racing, I feel hot, it's not good for my body. Is my thinking realistic? And what would I tell my best friend? We always use that in CBT. We love that one. If your friend was in the same position as you about an interview, you would more than likely say something helpful, balanced, and rational, whereas your friend wouldn't be talking like that. So those are some really good questions that you can ask yourself. You can print them out if you like. But the main thing is to question how you're thinking. Don't let your mind be in charge. Question what's coming up. Because one of the things we often do before or during an interview is we start to catastrophize and we think there's going to be a negative outcome. We decide that thoughts about the outcome of the interview are facts because they've come up in our heads, we think they must be true. And so we start upsetting ourselves. And the other thing that we call in CBT demand thinking, like I must do well in this interview, or I should be able to do good in this interview. That's another thing that the mind starts to do. But it's not written in stone anywhere that we must perform absolutely perfectly in this interview. It's not decided by the stars that we must get this job or the world as we know it will end. It's not the only chance you will ever have to work. It's likely that nobody but you and the interviewer will ever know or care about how the interview actually went. You will either be a good fit for the job according to the interviewer and the interviewer's criteria, or we won't. C'est la vie. All we can do is our best. The ideal healthy view of us is curiosity and excitement mixed in with a bit of nervousness. So if we can sort of work with our thinking, then we've got a sort of a more balanced and appropriate, a little bit of nervousness is fine, but we've got more balanced thinking going into the interview. So if you do dispute your thoughts in the way I've taught you to do, and you start looking at your thought, your four record thought column, and you look at what's happening, what feelings are coming up, what negative thoughts you're having, and then what more balanced thoughts you can have. If you start doing that, and then you go to the interview and it's much tougher than you thought, don't give yourself a hard time, okay? Think about the thought stopping technique again. If you think I'm not good enough, I just blew that, I didn't do very well in this interview, you could say, it's more correct to say, well, I wasn't at my best because my anxiety affected me. It would be more correct to say, I did my best, it was harder than I thought, I was nervous and mumbling, but I couldn't remember any examples of anything I've ever done, but I stayed with it and I've learned from it. Even if I showed nervousness, to what degree? Well, so what? It won't be the first or last time that the interviewer will have seen somebody nervous. They will get that all the time. So if you practice this CBT techniques in lots of situations, so every time you notice that you're having negative automatic thinking, you ask yourself, what's more correct to say? It's more correct to say. It's just getting to the habit of using that little sentence, really. It's really, really simple. And any way you can start examining your thinking, like I said before, by using your thought diary or keeping your own thought diary, you'll start to really discover what it is that's causing you the anxiety around interviews and all the other situations. Okay, so try some thought stopping this week and say to yourself, wow, I'm caught in a thought storm. It's more correct to say, I'm feeling anxious, I'm caught in a thought storm. Okay, this is a more rational and more balanced approach to take. And new thinking will just naturally come along. More natural, balanced thinking will come along when you thought stop. Well, that was a very simple technique to try this week, but I hope it's been useful for you. And we'll try some other simple techniques again next week. And if anybody's interested in following up more CBT, looking into more detail about their thinking and their feeling, then contact us and we can take you through the blended CBT program, the Silver Cloud blended CBT program. Okay, thanks very much, guys. Bye.